Hello and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success Podcast brought to you by Sproutwith.com. I'm Vinay Koshin. Our guest today is Dan Tyre. Dan joined HubSpot back in 2007 as employee number 6 and is now sales director at HubSpot. Dan, you, as I understand it, initially started as the first salesperson at HubSpot, but you've gone on to develop sales teams through management, recruiting, and training, contributed to forming a number of sales teams, including one called Spider Monkeys, which I'd love to hear about. You've also gone on to write a book with Todd Hockenberry called Inbound Organization, How to Build and Strengthen Your Company's Future Using Inbound Principles. You're also actively involved in the startup scene in Arizona. In fact, you were involved in 4 startups prior to joining HubSpot rather. So I'm curious, what was it back in 2007 that interested you in HubSpot and got you to sign up with them?
Oh, first of all, that was a great introduction. I had to take you on the road with me. Very nice. Second of all, great to be here. We embrace our Australian location in Sydney and all of the Australian economy, helping companies grow better. And you have it pretty much 15 years ago. What were you doing 15 years ago, Vinay?
Gosh, 2007, I think I was working in a digital agency myself.
Yeah. All right. And a few things have changed since 2007, at
Absolutely.
least for me. How many people do you know that have worked for the same company for 15 years?
Not too many.
Yeah, I have had a couple of segments over the last 42 years. I've done 5 startups. The first startup, I was there for 10 years. The second one, I was there for 10 years, but 15 is a little bit different and super excited about the mission. In 2007, I was just coming off a stint working for Microsoft, a great multinational office productivity company. And I had gotten into Microsoft by acquisition. Right. My 4th startup was this company, Groove Networks, and Microsoft bought Groove, and I worked for Microsoft for a while. And then my boss at that Groove called me and said, "We're doing this startup called HubSpot. Would you be interested in joining?" And I'm like, "I live in Arizona." And they started the company in Cambridge, Massachusetts, all the way on the other side of the country. Yeah. And I'm like, "Why are you asking me, Stan? You're a great startup guy. You got all that energy. And you're one of the best salespeople I've ever met." I'm like, "Oh, that's so nice." I'm like, "But this is different. This is not a enterprise selling process, right? Yep. This is selling directly to entrepreneurs." And I worked with the vice president of sales, the first vice president of sales of Mark Roberge, who's now the entrepreneur in residence at Harvard Business School. And I joined HubSpot as employee number 6 and the first salesperson. And it was amazing. I always tell everybody, everything that I learned before 2007, before HubSpot, threw it right out of the window. Because 15 years ago, when you were running your digital agency, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have smartphones. We didn't have the way we scale companies today. And in 2022, it's totally different, right? Based on the inbound foundation, based on the way in which we engage, based on a variety of different factors. Business is much different in the 21st century. But you're right. I started essentially cold calling for HubSpot. Don't tell anybody, because we're not really a big cold calling kind of. But even back in the early days, it was very fun and exciting because it was different. It was fast. It was transactional. We added incredible value, and the culture of the company was meaningful, which is we had an altruistic goal of trying to play into the changes in the way people were buying so that we could make it easier for individuals and companies to grow better. And 15 years later, we're just starting to scratch the surface. Brian Halligan, our CEO, always says we're in the second inning. So for your Australian listeners, that's like in the first time you hit the cricket bat or something like, it's like very early in the match. Let's put it that way. And it's true, right? Today, HubSpot has 145,000 paying customers, and we're growing like a weed. And it's super exciting because more and more people are understanding this whole concept of the inbound revolution. And I was there at the beginning. Right, just because of my relationships, and have been afforded an internal perspective on how that works for over a decade.
Given that you've grown this company now to over $1 billion, et cetera, what is it that drives you? As in, what makes you get up and go early in the morning to work for HubSpot? Is it just the phenomenal growth, or is there more?
So there's a variety of different things, but my mission statement is to do the most good for the universe, and I'm all about purpose. Right. And every time I've thought about maybe doing something different, I've weighed the ability that I have to make an impact as a part of HubSpot, as opposed to being an illustrious HubSpot alumni. Right. And inbound has changed quite a bit in the last 15 years, but the mission is still the same. And that is to help millions of individuals and companies grow better, scale better, And utilizing the technology is a great way to do it. So I love the people at HubSpot and employees. I love the partner channel, which is amazing. And I've had the ability to interact with it since the inception in 2009. I love the new HubSpotters, right? There's now 6,000 HubSpotters across the world, and they're taking a fresh perspective on moving from $1.5 billion to scale towards multiple billions of dollars. And that's just super fun and exciting, and just a great way to spend my time. And
I'm also curious, we mentioned Spider Monkey Teams as one of the teams that you created. What exactly do they do?
Yeah, so in the early stages of HubSpot, the board of directors thought that we might run out of the concept of inbound leads. Because remember, in 2007, inbound, the definition of inbound was a little bit different than it is. We started with inbound marketing, and the whole idea was to trick out your website so that you were getting found on for SEO, for Google search, Bing search. I think it was Bing, Yahoo search at the time. Yeah. And then people would find you, then they would drop their contact information, and then you could effectively engage with them at a higher engagement level because they showed some level of initiative. That changed quite dramatically 2 years in, because from a sales perspective, those inbound leads became very valuable, because as a salesperson, the biggest challenge for engagement is the prospecting part. And when you call somebody and say, Vinay, I saw that you came to the website. I saw that you dropped your contact information. What were you looking for help with? And you're like, oh yeah, HubSpot. Oh yeah, I was looking for some educational content. Now all of a sudden you're starting the conversation. Those leads were highly valuable. It completely changed the sales process, because in the old days you were doing like all the work. Now a marketing organization tricking out your website and putting calls to action and landing pages would greatly accelerate the process. Then in 2014, right, it changed all again with the HubSpot CRM. That's the underlying way to keep track of all your customers and prospects and partners in one location. And then in 2015, it changed all again with the HubSpot flywheel. That's putting the customers at the center of the sales process. And then in 2019, whole different approach. Now we have 5 hubs, and it's inbound front office. And now in 2022, this flywheel moves on to creating community. Right. So all of that is like separate segments of this inbound growth. Right. And inbound is a set of leadership principles that help you define your best employees for your team, your best ecosystem to work in, the best customers to work with, and it's a proven superior way to grow your business. So you referenced the book that I wrote with Todd. It's called The Inbound Organization, and it talks all about ways that you can utilize those leadership principles to grow quickly, to grow effectively, and to accommodate all of the changes in the digital world, so that you're growing profitably for both your employees as well as your.
So when you talk about leadership principles and inbound, could you expand on that? How do you work together?
We call it the building blocks of the inbound organization, but inbound was originally defined in 2007 as this narrow discipline of tricking out your website. But it's changed so much since then. The key ideas of the inbound organization start with, number one, putting people first in all your interactions. So it's treat people like human beings. And Vinay, it's dismaying that you have to remind your listeners that they have to treat people like human beings. Does that seem a little?
Yeah, it does. But there are different perceptions of the way business should be done, and that's something we need to counter. So
whenever anybody says, are you sure you have to remind me? I'm like, just look at my Twitter feed, right? Just look at any social media, right? Everybody is shaming people, dissing people. Who's got it? Just treat people like human beings. You would not pay half that dopey stuff, right? If you were face to face with somebody, buying lists and spamming folks, sending non-customized emails, non-personalized, that's horrible. No one wants to do that, yet it happens like billions of times, trillions of times a day all over the world. So putting people first in all interactions, that means you lead with empathy. That means you focus on hiring the right people that will engage your customers in a proper fashion. And putting people first is an important foundation of an inbound organization. The next thing you do is you help everyone regardless of their ability to become a customer. And that's slightly controversial. I've always been a help first guy. I've got a famous blog article that says, it used to be called Always Be Closing is Dead. It's time to always be helping. And then they changed it to the new sales mantra is always be helping, because they optimized it for SEO. But the philosophy is that you help everyone first, regardless of their ability to buy. And if you can add value, and if it's appropriate for where they are, then you take the steps to become a customer. But the more people the better your visibility are going to be. And the more opportunities that you'll have to essentially work with folks to select the right people to help grow your business. And helping first, I may have alluded to a story in our briefing meeting where I was giving a speech in New York City. And like I was halfway through my presentation explaining help first, and some guy stood up in the third row. I'm like, first of all, don't interrupt my presentation in front of 300 people. You stand up, but it's New York City. It's a little bit weird. And he's saying, no, that's not the way we do it. I'm like, okay, how do you do it? And it's a big room. So the guy's going, the way we do it is we call 126 people. And 2 of those people have a conversation. And then we schedule them for a second conversation and take them through the process. I'm like, great. What about the other 124 people you call? He's like, yeah, we hire people out of college. They don't really care. I'm like, yeah, what's your turnover rate? And he's, yeah, it's pretty high. And I'm like, what do you think of the other 124 people who hang up on you because they couldn't care less? He said, that's just the way we do it. I'm like, audience, what do you think? And they're like, boo. The guy had to walk out of my presentation, which probably deserved it, and just because he wasn't treating people like human beings. He wasn't helping first. Now, if he had called and said, I'm offering you something, right, that you might be able to take advantage of, anything rather than that, like hardcore cold calling, that would have gone a long way towards helping him build a reputation. And like in Australia, cold calling is still a multi-billion-dollar business. People do it all the time, but it's not much fun for the people who do it. It's not much fun for the people who are at the other end. It's not particularly effective. Latest statistics says that it's less than 1% effective. So you're wasting 99% of your time, effort, and money on something that is going to convert 1% of the time. That's like insanity. And there's a better way to do it. So helping people, there's a million people. This podcast is helping people, right? We're introducing people to the concepts. We're explaining a different way to do it. And it's like a very valid way of building awareness and visibility. And then the third part is focus beats. And I don't know if you've ever heard the term, the riches are in the niches. Have you ever heard that term?
Yep, I have.
A million people have said it before me. But in early 2000s, you could be a generalist. You could sell to everybody. Today, in 2022, most folks choose somebody that's an expert in their particular area. And they do that because they want to get time to value a little bit more quickly, right? They want somebody they don't have to educate. They want somebody who understands their rhythms, their vocabulary, understands the kind of lay of the land. And this is a little harder for many of the entrepreneurs, many of the people who are scaling, but you can actually grow more quickly if you focus your approach on a very specific niche. I'm working with a company, Rivera Health in Arizona. And after a year, they finally figured it out that the best target for them is ambulatory medical practices that have at least 300 customer bills per month and that have a certain percentage of their bills go unpaid. I'm like, yeah, that's specific. So when people like they're connecting and they're saying, we only work with ambulatory practices that have at least 15 doctors that have 300 transactions and this amount of debt that is uncollectible so far. And people will be like, yeah, that's me. Or they're like, nah, that's not really me. In which case they say, all right, if you ever get to that point, if you know anybody, let me know. And that specifically has allowed them to double in size. Over the last, there goes, as soon as we locked in that ideal customer profile, as soon as we had that persona, then it became a lot easier for us to understand the vocabulary. They say it with such confidence. They have all of the case studies that support all of that. So it's just easier for them to acquire more customers that are in that niche. And the easiest way to grow now in 2022 is to make sure that you define that niche, and then you become the expert in that niche. And then more and more people will choose you because you're just the de facto person to go into that, to service that. All right, the next foundation of the inbound revolution is the customer experience is the ultimate competitive advantage, right? And there's still lots of product-led growth is still important. But it used to be that you picked a particular product because of one or two features that the other competitors wouldn't have for like quarters or years. And today, with the fast pace of product development, everybody's product it's getting to the same feature set sooner or later, right? So now it's not so much the product features that you're buying, it's the relationship that you're building. Because if the product you buy doesn't have those product features, it's likely to have it if they're important product features in the near future. So intentionally designing the experience to make sure there's proper coordination and build in win-win relationships with everyone in the ecosystem. That customer experience, creating and defining particular ideal personas and then content to deliver to the right person at the right time when they need it. Like you have to be a genie rising from their keyboard. And as soon as they move from like discovery phase to consideration phase, you want to make sure that you're providing different information so that they make an easy decision. And then the final part is measuring everything and leveraging technology to create personalized value for each relationship. And this is where technology has probably made the biggest impact in the last 10 years. Now, how quickly you have to return a call if somebody chats or calls you to make the biggest impact?
Every second.
Yeah, you have 5 minutes, right? And after 5 minutes, it falls within 55 minutes. Then after 50, it falls right out. And when you call people after 2 hours, they're like, yeah, I called you this morning. They got a chip on their shoulder because the expectation is you're going to. So if you don't have your CRM hooked into a notification system, you don't have it lead like notifications, you're at a huge disadvantage. But if something pops up and I'm like, ooh, I'm trying to track down Vinay, and all of a sudden I see you're on my website, I call you up. I'm like, Vinay, this is Dan. I see that you're on the website. This is not too creepy, is it? And sometimes you're like, yeah, it's a little creepy, Tyre. And sometimes you're like, I'm glad that you called. I was just looking at your pricing page and I'm trying to determine if I need the starter or the professional edition. And that type of response, that personalized response, is the differentiating factor. You have to be able to measure that. In 2022, every company is a tech company. Every company has to have a chatbot on their website. They have to be able to have that instant notification. They have to have their website tied into their CRM. Because when I call you up, I'm like, wait a second, Vinay, you've been interested in HubSpot all the way back since 2016. You were on our website in 2016, 2017. You downloaded that ebook. You attended that webinar. And you're like, wow, that's pretty good. How do you know all that stuff, Tyre? You weren't even around back then. I'm like, first I was, but second of all, right? That's what lead intelligence does. It gives you a better understanding of where the customer is. Go back and review all of that in 7 to 10 minutes. Now you have a huge competitive advantage of engaging with somebody to negotiate or determine if it's a good fit. And that type of like attention to detail and ability to tie into technology is now available to virtually everyone, right? As long as they're planning for it and understand how to effectively use it. So that technology stuff, especially in what we call legacy or traditional industries, becomes critically important, right? A component that they haven't had to leverage in the past that now can become a competitive advantage.
I love what you're saying because it resonates with a lot of what I've been trying to highlight on the podcast, which is certainly at the core of things lies empathy. But I also say that empathy is not enough. You need compassion, which is the ability to take action on the fact that you're empathizing with certain people. And certainly you spoke to customer experience, product-led growth. Yes, it's important, but I've always said that at the end of the day, customer experiences boil down to our ability to create value for other people. And that boils down to creating remark-worthy experiences, be it through content or conversation, ultimately. So that certainly resonates quite deeply with me. I can certainly testify as well to the fact that responding to a customer inquiry or activity within a few seconds back in, 2003, I was working for a SaaS company before SaaS was a thing. And I would see a person sign up for a trial, call them back almost straight away. And I think I closed rather significant deals because of that. Just that alone, it certainly makes sense. Why, in your opinion, though, creating the culture required for an inbound organization is still something of a bumpy road for most organizations?
Because they don't think about it. They don't realize that their employees are more important than their customers. This was very controversial when we wrote the book, and we asked all of the senior executives of HubSpot and a variety of other companies, what's more important, your customers or your employees? And there's a healthy discussion in the book, but what evolved is that if you don't have employees that understand the mission, that can articulate the mission, that don't understand that they're solving for the customer, it's very hard to have good customer satisfaction. So it is, do you love your mother? Do you love your wife? But your employees have to come first. And then if you're going to build that culture, which is a hugely important thing in 2022, right? Number one, you have to define your mission. And like growing to $10 million is not a mission, right? That's an output of understanding how you're going to help. You have to know your mission and you have to articulate your mission. One of the ways that we do it at HubSpot is called an M spot. And an M spot starts with your mission. And your mission only changes maybe once every 10 years. Our mission is to help millions of businesses grow better. And it's been like that for almost 10 years. And it's unlikely to change. And everybody should know that. It should be simple. It should be at every company meeting. It should be repeated all the time. Then the S in M spot is who you, and that is, for us, it's slightly redundant. It's our employees, our partners, and our 145,000 customers. But that S is very important because to do all the great things you talked about, Vinay, it's just so much easier if you're talking to folks in Australia that are manufacturing companies that are exporting globally that are between $3 and $10 million. Right? Because when you say that, then you're defining it in a way in which you're going to talk to those people more often. You're going to understand all of their vocabulary and experiences. You're going to understand the import and export laws. And you're just by definition going to be doing a better job than if you work with professional services, medical devices, and leaning into that who you serve is important. Then the P in MSpot is the plays. Those are the 3 to 5 things that you're doing at an organizational level that are really going to move the dial. The T in MSpot is the targets. Right. And you have a regular target and a stretch goal target. And it's important for people to understand the top 3 or 5 things that the company is doing on a regular basis. And then the O is probably the most fun. That's the O. There's lots of things that entrepreneurs can do and want to do. But the key to success is to be focused on the right kind of things, just like finding the right employees to build that culture. If it is still worthwhile, but it's not going to be something that you're going to focus on this year, you put it in the O for MSpot. And you create this MSpot, and you bring it up in every company meeting. And then divisions create their own MSpot, and then departments create their own MSpot. And that helps you have that alignment that's necessary for scale. And then in HubSpot's case, we went to the extra step to create a culture code. And are you familiar with the HubSpot culture code?
Not HubSpot's culture code specifically, but I'm assuming that's a lot like a culture document that everyone is aware of and refers to.
It's interesting. HubSpot has a very tiny policy manual. I don't know if it's an actual manual. There's only one policy in our policy manual. If you had to create a company that just had one policy, what would the policy be?
No idea.
It's a hard one, right?
Yeah.
Like for most normal companies, like a whole policy, they have like hundreds of them, thousands of them. By the way, no one reads them and no one like internalizes them. And it's too hard to like, as soon as you print that actual manual or find it online, they're out of date. So HubSpot decided to have one policy, which is use good.
Okay.
Use good judgment, which has served us very well over 15 years because it puts the onus on the individual to understand what the MSpot is, understand and make good decisions. And it's the ultimate in pushing the decision down to the front line. Anyway, we went to the point of creating this culture code. It's 147 slides now. You just Google HubSpot culture code and you'll see it. And you can take and read ours, which is pretty awesome. It's updated periodically, or you can create your own. But where real HubSpot created this great culture of overachievement, execution, empathy, and compassion is to lean in to what we call persona. Now, many of your listeners probably understand a persona, right? But they create personas for their customers and prospects. We created a persona for a HubSpot employee. And we said, okay, this is what we want. This is what we're looking for. This is what we're recruiting for. And over the last, 5 years, we've recruited 2,500 folks that all know what the culture code is. In fact, if you show up to your HubSpot interview and don't know what the culture code is, you didn't do enough research because it's super easy to find and it's listed everywhere. And it's part of what we're looking for in a proactive, accomplishment-oriented person who understands that we take this seriously. Like the team of people working together is critically important to helping millions of small businesses.
The MSpot, in a manner of speaking, is almost like an operating system that you use internally to drive your business. Terrific.
There's only one difference. It's not so much an operating system. It's one page so that everybody stays on the same page. They have to understand the high level. And in 2022, you have to understand your mission. Everybody's listening to this podcast. You go back to your office. If you're the CEO, ask everybody you meet today, do you know our, and see how many positive responses you get. If you're not the CEO, but you work in the organization, ask your CEO, what is our mission? And how many people do you think know our mission? Because as Todd and I have done some work with companies who have been interested in implementing inbound organizations, we typically sit with the CEO in the first part of the engagement. And we say, all right, are you a mission-driven organization? They go, yes. We go, what's your mission? They tell us, and they usually have it like either in a card in their wallet or off the top of their head. And we're like, okay, how many people know your mission? They go, I'm like, okay, you want to bet? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, no one knows that mission. When was the last time you presented it? How many people on the senior management team know what it is? How do you reinforce it on a regular basis? And then he's, oh, I get where you're going from. And so when we get the group together, we're like, okay, what's the mission of this organization? And it typically shows there's a lot of work to be done to people to understand the mission. And at every opportunity, you reinforce the fact that the team, the employees, is the most important, and that focusing on the mission is a critically important component of success.
So how does this apply or play out when it comes to sales? Now, I think you just said that you developed the sales flywheel model and you've moved on from there. So what does it look like now, and how does culture impact your sales processes?
All right, so that's great. Now, the processes are critically important, and so you have to buy into this. This is a little bit controversial, right? The way we lead with our sales process is when we call a good fit customer, we explain who we are, what we do, and we offer to. So the first part is identifying what segment you fall into, because customers traditionally have multiple segments, right? They're aligned geographically and aligned based on company size. We have details of whether they've used our technology in the past or they're brand new. We have details of what technology they're using today. And the first time we cycle in, we say, we're introducing ourselves. What were you looking for help with if they're an inbound lead? Or how can we help you if they're an outreach that have never come to HubSpot? And has anybody ever called you on the phone 4 times in 12 days today and asked you how they can help you?
No.
What would happen if they did?
I would probably get a very different response.
Yeah. And we'd send you a little video that said, hey, we saw that you're in Australia. We saw that you're a podcast producer. And if you're looking to get more visibility for your podcast audience, we have a couple of ideas that we can talk. Put 15 minutes on my calendar and we'll see how we can help. So that outreach as a salesperson is a little weird, right? You have to have a little larger connection, right? And you don't qualify on the first call. All you do is help. When you have that 15-minute conversation, do a lot of research, and we're like, hey, see, you have 6, 8 salespeople. Looks like you're growing. Looks like your website, you're looking to generate more business. Do I have that? And they'd be like, yeah, we're trying to grow. And they're like, all right, what's the key? I call them inhibitors to growth. What are the 3 things that we need to do that if we could potentially fix them, right, it would generate more leads or help you acquire more customers or give you a competitive advantage or help your current customers buy more? And sometimes they know, sometimes they don't know, in which case, all right, would you like us to run a report so that we can have this conversation so we can dig in to see if HubSpot technology or a HubSpot Academy or one of HubSpot's paid or non-paid products can help you? And some people are like, why are you doing all this? We're like, this is the way we do it. And they're like, don't you want to sell me something? We're like, if it fits, right? But right now, what we want you to understand is these are where you're at. The most significant thing for customers, for HubSpot customers today, you got to measure everything. If you're not measuring everything, right, then you're missing a huge opportunity because you can't improve what you don't measure. And measuring that, right, with easy to use, easy to install technology is hard for a lot of small businesses. And HubSpot makes it super easy from your website all the way to your CRM, all the way to your marketing software, all the way to your operations software, all the way to your service software. And that process we call crafted, not cobbled, because lots of billion-dollar software companies go out and buy other software companies and then stick them all together and say, no, we have this complete product suite, which is not really a product suite. It's 16 disparate products that are under the same like logo. In HubSpot, our process is to build everything ourselves. So it's easier for our end user customer. That's why we've consistently been voted the #1 CRM for scalable companies. And the crafted, not cobbled is very, when people look under the hood, they're like, oh, that's pretty impressive. I can see how that gives us a competitive advantage. As that relates to the sales process, you're teaching salespeople to just go out and introduce themselves, offer to help, and then you have to touch more people because you have to be very aware of where they are in the process. And lots of people are still in the education mode, which kind of pisses me off a little bit. Vinay, because I've been doing this for 15 years. I thought everybody in Australia, New Zealand, United States knew what HubSpot is. Everybody knew the inbound revolution. It's like obvious. I've been doing this for a long time. And of course, that's incredibly myopically focused and like stupid, because it's going to be another 15 years until everybody understands how technology can assist them. And lots of people, especially if they've been highly successful, have had no need for the technology. Now we have to teach salespeople this new process of going out and engaging. And if people aren't ready, if they're just in education mode, ping them 4 times a year, say, I'm your person. If there's ever anything that I can do to help, you come back to me. And then some people will move from education mode into discovery mode. They're like, okay, I think we're ready. You helped me that time in 2018. And they'll all say, Dan, do you remember in 2018 when you called me and offered to help me optimize my website? And I'm like, nah. I got nothing. 2018, like you, Vinay, in 2007. You're like, no, I think I was with a digital agency, but and they're like, no, Tyre. And then I'll go into my CRM. I'll see when I talk to them in 2018. I'll go, that's right. You just hired 3 people and you were looking to expand via sales and you weren't quite sure. They're like, yeah, that's it. And now it's different. right? In 2022, we want to automate the process. We want to make sure that our salespeople are getting those inbound leads. We want to make sure that we're reaching out and helping more folks. And can HubSpot technology help us with that? And in most cases, we can, or we're going to say, no, you're not ready yet. And in chapter 26 of the Inbound Organization book, by the way, plug in the book. If you go to inboundorganization.com, there's all these free resources. Todd and I put up all this stuff that your listeners can take advantage of. Just go there and download the assessment, and you can see the MSpot template and all those kind of things. And the ability to engage in that fashion it's a competitive advantage, right? Because sooner or later, most everybody is going to have to turn to that foundation of the inbound process. Because which do you prefer? Do you want somebody to help you or want somebody to sell to you?
Oh, always.
Why? Yeah, it's just innate.
Yeah.
And guess what? It's a lot more fun, right?
Yeah.
And I tell people, you decide. And when I was a first-time salesperson in 2007, I was a little pushy. I'm like, all right, is this a decision that you can make this like month? And in 2022, if I ever said that, right, tried it a couple of times in 2014, people would ghost me. They'd never call me back. They'd be like, okay, Tyre, you ruined that trust relationship that you spent so much time to help. So now I'm saying I'm at your service. Right. There's reasons why you should go more quickly than happy to talk through them. In most cases, right, if you want that competitive advantage, first mover advantage is pretty important, but we'll be willing to work with you. And salespeople now in 2022 have to be like surgeons. They have to diagnose the opportunity. They got to make sure that it's going to be a good relationship. They got to make sure that we can do what the customer wants us to do, because it used to be buyer beware. If you bought the wrong stuff, you'd call my boss and complain. Now it's seller beware. If I sell you something and it doesn't work, it's all over social media. It impacts your customer ratings. You got a reputation of not being particularly effective, and that will kill the scale of virtually any company.
So that's interesting, because I was speaking with Casey Cheshire, the founder of Ringmaster, who I asked him what he'd like to ask you. And he said, a lot of people buy products because of their features. But from what I'm hearing, you're very much focused on ensuring that there is a good fit with their overall strategy before suggesting that they look into HubSpot as a potential solution.
It has nothing to do with it. First of all, I want to understand where you are today and where you want to go. I want to understand if you have to move or you don't have to move. I want to understand if you'll consider a new way of doing it, because inertia rules in virtually, especially with all the things going on in 2022. The only thing that matters is customer experience. And if there's one thing that you absolutely need this solution to provide, I want to know it. I want to know it up front. And if we can't do it, I'm going to say we're not the best fit for you, which is the hardest thing for a salesperson to do when somebody's willing to buy. There's a whole chapter on this with David Winehouse where somebody wanted to buy HubSpot and he wouldn't let him buy it. They're like, no, we got our credit card out. He's like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to say you are not ready. And they got ticked off. They called his boss. He said, they're not ready. They went out and got another solution. They came back 2 years later and said, Winehouse was right. Now they're a HubSpot partner in very good standing. They love to tell that story because it's the hardest thing to do, where you say, no, it's not a good fit. You're not ready. This is the things that you got to do. And then we'll work together to implement the technology so that you can scale. And if you do that, then you get the completely different reputation as somebody who's going to help, not sell, somebody who's going to use their background and experience to effectively diagnose whether somebody is a good fit or not. And then the transition between prospect to customer and then customer, right, into like a experienced customer. And then we want to use those type of experienced customers in the flywheel to talk to other customers. Because Halligan, our CEO, is famous for saying your customers are more impactful for future business than the sales team. And to a certain extent, he is, because if you have a bad reputation in the marketplace, it's hard. If you have a good reputation, customers be more ardent than I am about using the technology. They're like, no, it's super easy to use. No, we learned it. No, this is what worked. This is what they need a little improvement. This isn't quite where an industrial strength. But hearing it from a third party of somebody who's gone through a similar process becomes very impactful for generating a net new business.
I'm just doing a quick time check here, maybe a couple of questions if you've got the time for it. Says inbound, HubSpot has always been great at coining these new terms or categories, as you might call it. How do you do it? And how do you keep coming up with these new terms to define the ideas that you're talking about or bringing into the marketplace?
Okay, so the first one, inbound marketing, was Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Shah. And the story is in 2007, they were at MIT, and Brian was working his way through MBA school, and he was working for a venture capital company. He went out and he would give $5 million of a Series A funding to these technology companies. And he'd say, what are you doing with it? And they'd say, I'm going to hire cold callers, and I'm going to go to trade shows, and I'm going to put print advertising in magazines. Remember magazines? In 2007, magazines don't even exist anymore, I don't think. And he'd be like, all right, and what's the ROI on that? And they're like, what's hard to say? And then Dharmesh started this blog on the internet called On Startups, which he's since moved over to LinkedIn, and was generating like tens of thousands of unique visitors without spending a dime. He was doing it in his spare time. And Brian's, wait a second, I'm giving all these people. And he would go back to the people he funded and say, what are you doing on the internet? And they're like, what are you talking about? That's for geeks. And they're like, no, you got to be able to lean into a digital presence. And they saw that dichotomy, and they saw that there's a differentiation there. And they saw that there was a fundamental inflection point in the way people buy. And in the old days, sales was everything. Right? Before you could buy, you had to talk to a salesperson to see, number one, is it stock? How big it was? Did it come in purple? Could it fit in the back of your truck? All those kind of things. You don't do any of that now. Now you get all that stuff online. You get it from a review. Now you need the salesperson to give you the technical analysis. You need the salesperson to size it up. You need the salesperson to make sure that it's going to work for what you want it to do. And that's infinitely more difficult, more challenging, but plays to the balance of power. Now it's like the person who buys has a much higher level of control, right? And so the whole flywheel is taking the funnel process where the salespeople were in control out and putting the customer in the center. So the customer now gets to decide when they want to go. Customer decides how quickly they want to move. The customer decides how they want to buy. And smart, thoughtful companies have to respond to that, because lots of people are different. And the ability to do that makes a lot of sense.
Got time for one more?
Yeah.
Scott Miller from Franklin Covey says email has always been talked about as being the best marketing channel. For him, however, he gets a lot of spam. And in fact, he communicates more with his team and with people via social media and other tools like Slack. So is email still a viable inbound marketing tool into the future?
It is. There's just some changes. Number one, every email that you send to me has to be customized and personalized. Number two, it has to be, don't waste my time with generic stuff that I don't care about. But if you say, Dan, I can improve your Australian podcast listener base in 3 easy steps, you got my attention, right? Yep. And all that stuff is available. So email is not a good way to negotiate. It's not a particularly good way of doing mass spamming kind of things, which is how it's used. The reason why people hate marketers is because they would take a good, well-meaning product like email and they just ruined it. They just took it to the extreme and ruined it. But the people who are putting videos in their email, you can use HubSpot video for the professional enterprise product. The people who are, or you can go out and get a free product, Vigor, Loom, a Soapbox from Wistia, all great products. And you send me a little video that explains what is going on. A short video, so customized, short, and includes video, and I'll eat that up. Right? Not only will I watch it, maybe I'll watch it multiple times. If you've done your homework and you're tailored it to me, I'm appreciative of the fact that you did that homework and did the extra step. So that shows that you want to earn money.
Would you say that the same sort of thing will happen to content, given that there's a lot of content being produced by AI as opposed to genuinely useful content?
Yeah, no question. If technology can't discern that I'm in the United States and that you're in Australia, then I should look at a picture of a football player and you should look at a rugby player, and they better show you an Australian rugby player rather than the All Blacks, or forget about it. You won't even talk about it. And that kind of stuff, we're almost there. We're almost at that rapid customization using machine learning and AI, where we can identify who's engaging, where they're engaging from, what their purpose, title, sophistication is going to be, and deliver that to enhance the message. You could also go back, and if I've been to your website 15 times and you're like, Dan, thanks for coming back. Number 16 times, you've been here this time. It was not that hard. That shows me, right, that you're paying attention. That shows me that you're using technology for competitive advantage. That makes me feel like I'm a respected or valued prospect, and should convert to higher conversion rates.
Brilliant. And to wrap up, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
We want to make sure that you're always helping. Do whatever you can. It's hard to scale, but my mission statement is doing the most good for the universe. Everybody can do that, right? It's not limited to just senior executives or just experienced entrepreneurs. Anybody can do it, right? You can do it as easily as helping with a podcast like this. You can find somebody to mentor. You can hold the door open for somebody. Just have that empathy and compassion that you talked about at the beginning, which is the reason I'm doing that. Stormy asked if I would do it. I'm like, in a second. That message in 2022 is so important, because it's always people before like business. And smart people understand that compassion, that empathy, and the ability to treat people like human beings. You can say it a variety of different ways, but there's a lot of money circulating in the world and lots of people have gazillions of dollars. So what really matters is the strength of your relationships, your ability to lean in, and where you get the most back is when you help somebody. Regardless of the retribution. If you just help somebody, they're amazed. They're like, oh my goodness. And that connection lasts a lot longer and is as valuable as any profit that you get from that customer.
Sure. And if listeners are curious, wanted to find out more, certainly they could go to HubSpot.com. But is there a place that you would recommend they head to learn about you and connect with you?
I'm an open book. You can go to www.dantyre.com. You can go to my LinkedIn, Dan Tyre, Executive at HubSpot. You can connect with me on Twitter at Dan Tyre. You can go to Instagram, dtyre1, if you want to see pictures of my food, right? I'm on all the social media and embrace it all, right?
Perfect.
It's important. It's human. And for the rest of my professional career, I'm going to do everything I can to help everybody grow.
Excellent. Dan, much appreciated. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do this.
Vinay, this was fun. Thanks for the briefing. Super happy to do it. I hope it makes a great recording and I'm at your service. And if I can help any of your listeners, just let me know.